Next, I've decided to neaten the edge off with bias binding because I find facings, particularly on bodices that have got straps, a little bit annoying. So I've decided, because it's going to have a pretty trim over outside anyway, I'm going to sew on bias binding. So we start, and I leave a good couple of centimetres on the edge there to start with. It is very tricky. I'm not saying this is easy. You've got to sew your bias binding on all the way around the edges, being very, very careful, and you leave about 5mm from the edge because I want the seam to start just a little bit lower. So I'm not actually lining this edge up with the edge of the fabric, it's at least 5mm below it, all the way around, right to the other side, to the end. And again, leave a couple of centimetres on the edge because you're going to be turning it in. The next thing we're going to do is to trim off the excess fabric that you can see on the seams and around the rest of the bodice, and just tidy up those edges. Okay, so we just start the end, just trimming it down, just tidying up the edges a little bit. You're not taking a huge chunk off, you're just making sure those edges are nice and tidy. And we'll just carry on our way along to the other side of the bodice top edge, just really tidying up that excess fabric. Right, so next we need to start turning the bias in, and Mum's just going to explain and demonstrate that.
Okay, so you turn in your edge like that, and then you're going to turn your bias down so you can just about see the top of the fabric on the outside, and you can tuck the tail of the bias up into there. Just going to pin this down into place, and carry on doing that all the way around. Just want to see a little bit of the fabric from the course bodice as you go.
And we'll just continue to do that all the way around. Right, so what I'm doing now is, pretty much you'll see me do this on waistbands for skirts, is I've already started at the very beginning, as Julie Andrews says, and I'm just doing some little catch stitches to hold this bias in place. Now I don't want to go through to the outside because then you'll see horrible stitches on the outside. So just manipulating the fabric carefully, pulling that over so you just see a bit of the outer fabric rolled back to the other back of the inside of the garment, I mean. And just taking a little bit of the liner fabric, just picking that up, and just catching a little piece of the bias at the bottom. And I'll do that all the way along. Now you see here I'm getting to the facing, so you'll pick up a bit of the facing fabric and a bit of the bias. Every 5 or 6 stitches I tend to go over it just a couple more times. That's just what I like to do, just in case, or just adds a little bit of extra strength every now and then, but you don't have to. So I'm just catching a little bit of that bit of the bias. When you got to the end here, as we showed you earlier, you've got to make sure that you've got, because you've bended this bias over and tucked it in, you want to make sure that is tucked inside so you can't see it. I'm going to take that pin out, might make it a bit easier. There we go. Now just really hold that tight. and this is where I might, at that point there at the start where the end of the bias is turned in, just do it a couple of times. So you're getting a lot more thicknesses here as well. So really making sure that's tucked in, which is easier said than done. But it's on the inside, so if a little bit pokes through, it really doesn't matter. Life is too short. So I'm just getting to the end here, right in the corner. And again, I just like to do a few extra stitches in the corners. Really make sure that's held down, and again, as I say, with the extra thicknesses you're going through now. And then I'll start going up the other side, doing a similar thing, sealing the ends together there. And again, I might just do a couple in the same place, because this thread is really fine as well. And then I'll just finish at the top here and I'll do 4 or 5 stitches at least to close it off, and then that'll be a nice neat edge all around your garment.
We're now doing a fit of the bodice to find out where the hooks and eyes will go on the back of the bodice on the opening. There will be an overlap here of about 2.5 centimetres. That's a nice fit for Tracy. So I've just put a pin there where my bar is going to go. We're not going to use metal eyes. We're going to use hooks and bars. So I'm going to actually make those myself. So just following it down, make it a comfortable fit, not too tight, not too loose. So that would be my line there that I'm going to follow down.
Now that I've turned the bias in at the top of the garment, I'm going to concentrate on the bottom, and I've basically tidied and levelled up as best I can the bottom edge. And next we're wanting to put in our boning. Now, as I said earlier, I think I showed you that I put straight boning on the front, and here on the side pieces, side back, I've put 2 straights there. But the others, apart from the side seams, will be curved, so that's why this spiral steel boning is really good, because it bends in lots of different directions and from left to right as well, so it's pretty helpful for when you have the curved seams here. So I've bought mine in 7mm wide, and you need end caps which are about 7mm as well to fit the 7mm boning. Because this comes in different sizes, you can get different size end caps. So first of all, cut your boning. Now I'm lucky because I have a wonderful dad with a whizzy tool who can cut these for me, but I will say it's very difficult to do. So anyway, he's gone ahead and done that for me to cut it to the sizes. Now obviously, because I've got to seal up the ends, and some of the ends at the top are still open, I haven't sealed them up like these blue ones, I want to make sure that it is just a little bit shorter than the strip of bias. So I've cut my boning a few millimetres shorter than the top edge, probably about 5mm short, like 0.5 centimetre, and the same for the bottom, so that it's not quite as long, and there's still room for me to just hand sew those ends shut. But first of all, need a pair of pliers, and you need to, and there's plenty of tutorials out there to show you how to do this properly. Put the caps on the end and seal them shut so they don't move. Okay, so next I want to slot my boning into the channel there, and I just want to make sure that few millimetres at the top and the bottom, and then I've got my needle threaded up here. I'm going to do, because obviously these ends are open, is I'm just going to come up through the back of the seam there. Don't go through the back of the actual garment, just where that seam is there, from the back of the cream liner up through the red. And I just like to do the usual few stitches at the start to make it strong, because you remember doing this by hand now, not on the machine. When you go through, make sure you just go through the excess seam allowance there, don't go through this bit here. So I've done that about 3 times or so, and then just go across the, start going across the top. I'm going to switch hands here just so you can see it on the video. I'm just going to go down there. And I'm going to do that a few times because I really want to make sure this boning is going to stay in. So I'm kind of doing like a back stitch. You could, if you wanted to, just go all the way along, then come back, then all the way along, come back, but I'm just doing it this way. There's no set way how you want to sew or seal the top, but basically you're just sewing stitches there and the bottom as well to seal the casing shut so that your boning doesn't slip out at any point. We're now moving on to the piping on the bodice. Now this was my second mock-up I did of the bodice, and I did some practice runs of piping, and as I really want to go to town with this, we usually just do the one line of piping, but I thought let's be a bit more extravagant this time, and I saw some double piping on a bodice and I thought okay, let's go for the double this time. So I found some modern methods online, tutorials on YouTube, and they just weren't showing it up very well, and we did 3 lots of examples here trying to do this double piping, and you can see there's just an edge there, but from the outside it's just showing absolutely nothing, it's just showing one line. And then by chance I found somebody doing what they said was the historical method for piping. So I haven't come up with this myself. I actually found a video. It wasn't the best video quality, I must say, but you could just about get the gist of what she was saying. So you fold one edge in, you then fold another edge in the other way, and so you're piping in. You can see I've already done one side here. I was just having a bit of a practice because it's not the most difficult thing, but it requires making sure that your piping is tight and keeping the seam allowance level exactly the same, or you end up with this kind of twisting business going on, and that can happen also if you haven't cut your bias strip on the bias grain correctly. So it's probably 2 issues with me. I didn't quite cut it diagonally, and also I was still practicing and it was a little bit wonky, but I've improved it since, so this is my improvement. So I've just done the one side, and then you would do exactly the same for the other. You would turn that edge in and then sew your piping in all the way along there, and then once you've done that you would then fold that over and then sew another line down there to hold them both together. And I thought that that's actually worked out a lot better, and if you can see from this example I've done, that certainly worked out a lot better than the modern tutorials we were finding, which just did nothing. So that is more or less what it's going to look like. And now we'll move on to the fabric I'm going to use and how to cut it and how wide. Okay, the next thing we want to do to start with is to get a length. Now you need to know how long your piping strip is going to be. Start measuring 1.5 centimetres up from the bottom. I'm measuring from the edge. There will be an overlap, but I'll add that on at the end, so we'll just go from the edge to make it simple. So you will measure about 1.5 centimetres up, which is where you'll be sewing your pipe in, to the point, and I get about 45. So that'll be another 45 that way, so we times up by 2 and I've got 90 centimetres for my length. But we need an overlap at the end, so I'm going to leave about 3 centimetres each end, so that makes 6 altogether. So 90 plus the 6 will be 96 centimetre length, which is just under a metre length all the way around the bottom. I want to use this silver Dupion fabric, which is exactly the same type of fabric I've used on the skirt and the bodice, but in silver. This was left over from my Ever After Cinderella dress, and I thought it'd be quite nice to have a little bit of a contrast rather than using pink, so that it doesn't look like it's breaking up the bodice from the skirt. But as you can see, we've got to cut it on the bias, and it doesn't have a straight line, so we're just at the minute trying to get a straight long line along that amount that I need, which was the 96 centimetres long, and it'll be 2.5 inches wide.
To get a straight edge on the bias, you need to have a straight edge to start with, and I'm using the selvage line here because we know that is straight. So put your protractor on that line, and then you need to measure up to 45 degrees. So put a ruler or a tape measure right at the centre of your protractor, and then put your ruler up against 45 degrees, which is there. So we know that this will give us a straight line. Actually, I think we might bump into that, so I'm going to move it a little bit further in. So same thing, get your protractor on a straight edge, and then your ruler goes from the middle up to 45 degrees on your protractor, which is there, and then you can mark a straight line from there.
So we've now got our straight edge along the bias, and you cut it along the bias because cutting things on the bias makes it curve around the corners more easily. So the next thing we needed to do is, because I've already done this earlier, as you saw, we already know how wide we've got to make this. So measuring from the edge, we need 2.5 inches, and I've placed marks at 2.5 inches all the way along. So that's how wide the strip needs to be.
Your apprenticeship.
Okay. Right, okay, next we're going to be making the piping. So I've got that silver bias here. You saw earlier we still had a diagonal angle there, so I've cut that end off straight, and the same on the other end. Now, as before, this fabric's got a matte side and a shiny side. I want the matte side of my piping to show, so we put it shiny side up. Unless your fabric is exactly the same both sides, then it won't matter. So basically you're going to be encasing the cord like so. But what I'm going to do first, because you don't want this moving around is I'm going to leave a little bit extra at the top and just pin it in place as you go through the cord. Make sure that's really held tight. So when I start sewing, I will probably just start a little bit down because I don't think the placement of that is quite right, but it will just help hold it there at the top. What I would like is a 1.5 centimetre turnover. So what I've done is I've turned it over so this measures 1.5 and I've put a little mark there. So when you open it up, that mark will total 3 centimetres from the edge. So all the way down I've done a little mark at 3 centimetres in. This is just to help me because I don't quite trust myself of it sewing it absolutely accurately on this length of fabric, which is nearly 1 metre long. So I've just put these dots just to help me, and as I say, I've got more here than what I need, so that is just holding it there for me. So what you want to do is turn that in, and you want to push the piping cord right up against there, but make sure that this edge lines up with your dots all the way down, so you're keeping that 1.5 centimetre turnover, but also keeping the piping tight as possible next to that edge. Now here on the machine we have a special piping foot which I've put in to help me do this. So I'm just going to, as I say, this piece is already at least 15 centimetres longer than what I actually need, and I'm just going to start a little way down. It really doesn't matter because you can cut it off after. So I'm just going to try and line up that hole and have this needle over. You can see here if I just move it there. So what I've done is moved it that way as far over to the left as I can. And again, being careful not to go over those marks I made. So if I go over those marks, I will know that I've gone too far, and your piping will end up twisting and looking a right mess. So I'm just going to put that needle down. This is where it starts getting really, really fiddly. So we want to start sewing, but you don't have to do a forwards and backwards at the start. I might just move that over a little bit. I think I'm actually just a bit, I know I said close, but I think I'm just a little bit too close. Okay, so I found I just had to adjust the needle a bit. I just had to move over a micro bit. So again, you're just lining that up with your dots, making sure it looks right as you go, keeping that tight, sewing as close as you can to the piping without going into the piping or without coming out here. And this is really slippy fabric as well, so I've got lots of challenges here. And I'm probably a little bit slower than what Mum would do. Those does require patience. Don't be tempted to do too much in one go. See already how fiddly this is. And if you want to, just check it at the back as you go, just to make sure. And if you're happy, just carry on doing that all the way to the bottom, being very, very careful as you go. So now we've sewn that side in, like so. We need to do the same for the other side. So again, I've put a rolled this in and I've put a pin to hold that there, and do the same again, make sure it's butted right up, and it should be more or less the same distance that you're doing all the way down, so you just fold that in so it meets nearly the other side, and you'll be sewing again all the way down exactly as you did for the other side, so it will look like that. Okay, so we've now got our 2 rows of piping and we've got the inside here. What I'm going to do next is fold it so that this piping butts up just against the other piping where that sewing line is where you sewed that in. So then you get your double piping effect then. So I'm just going to pin that like that, and I'll put a few pins all the way down just to help hold it in place, and then I'll be sewing again right over that last sewing line to hold the 2 sections together, but try not to get it, as I did on my first attempt, in places actually pulled this over too far. So try not to do that, try and keep them at a good distance from one another so you don't lose that double effect, and sew right up against it again all the way down to the bottom. So I've now sewn as close to that line as possible here, and this is what it looks like on the other side. So that's your double piping made and created.